So our guest speaker today is Dr. Gabriella Cacciotti. It gives me tremendous pleasure to welcome her to Virtual Summer School in Entrepreneurship Research 2026. She's a faculty member at Baylor University. You've read two of her papers today, so hopefully it's good to have a face to go with the name that you've been reading about. Her PhD is not from the US, which, as many of you might know, is sort of atypical in the US. Her PhD is actually from the UK. And Gabriella, we do have several people here from the UK who are either doing their PhD in the UK or working there as assistant professors. Her research is on corporate and international entrepreneurship, dynamic capabilities, social entrepreneurship, and entrepreneurship in family firms. Her interest is in the role of cognition and emotions within the entrepreneurial process. And she is the chair of the mentorship committee of ENT division. And her research has been published in journals such as Journal of Business Venturing, Entrepreneurship Theory and Practice, International Journal of Management Reviews, some of those articles you read for today, and many other journals. Gabriella, thank you and welcome.
Thank you so much. What a lovely introduction. Thanks.
So Gabriella, we'll start with our first question, which is, how did you get interested in entrepreneurship research? Did you want to be an entrepreneurship researcher or business scholar when you were 10 years old and thinking about what you're going to do with your life?
Well, I don't know if I was like that at 10, but I think as I went through school, pretty soon I realized that I really want to do something in education, or my job had to involve a level of sharing my knowledge with other people. I always, when you're little, especially girls, I see this with my daughter. She's 8 years old and she plays being a teacher. Okay. So that's very common in kids, especially in girls. That's the school environment is what they see, what they live, and this is what they replicate. And so nothing weird that I was doing that. But as I moved on, I was actually doing it for real. Even in early, like in middle school, I was already tutoring my friends that had some difficulties, and our teachers, they saw that I was very happy in doing that, and I kept doing it. I kept tutoring for free friends of mine until, I don't know, I graduated from university. So I think that that passion has been always with me, being a knowledge sharer. And then lately with the PhD and the research that I do, I'm also a researcher. But this idea of really sharing research, I always had it. Now, onto the specific field, it's a little bit of a serendipity story there. Actually, when I was studying international management in my master's, I always wanted to do something in OB, organizational behavior and human resources, more than entrepreneurship. I had no idea what entrepreneurship was, because even if I studied business, there was not much in entrepreneurship back then. And then that was the plan, trying to find a PhD in industrial psychology, so then I could do more things and research in OB. And I went to, before applying, when I finished my master's, I worked as a research and teaching assistant for my supervisor. And he is an entrepreneurship and HR professor. So I was paired with him because, the HR possibility, and continue to work on that with him or in other places. But then at some point, when I applied for the PhD in the UK, I had to write a proposal about a topic, and he knocked on my door and he said, "Hey, there is this cool construct that I'm hearing about. It's called the fear of failure, and it's the field of entrepreneurship." And I'm like, okay, I think you should write something about it. So in 2 weeks, I had to learn what entrepreneurship was and write a proposal on fear of failure, which it was good enough to grant me a scholarship and start a PhD in the UK. So this is how I started to become an entrepreneurship scholar. Yeah, and I loved it.
Wonderful. Now, let me ask you another related question. You grew up in Italy,
Mhm.
studied in the UK, and are now working in the US. In this journey, was there fear of failure at any point in your own career?
So yeah, I'm a very anxious person, and I really never liked competitions as a kid. I remember my parents not forcing me, but pushing me, encouraging me to do, the swim meet sort of things. And I remember being very crap at that. I'm so slow. I mean, why do you want me to feel humiliated? Always been the last one. And they were like, because it doesn't really matter. It's the idea of becoming familiar with a competitive context and learning what are the emotions that you feel there and being able to cope with it. So I really grew up with being an anxious person, but having a very supporting family. And I developed this curiosity of what happens to people when they're really, really feeling that and don't have the support that I have. I don't have people reminding me that it doesn't really matter the final outcome. What it matters is the learning that you can get there, the learning of the skill, and but also the learning on how to cope with those feelings. So that's why I loved psychology, and it was a matter for me, what are the best fields that I can apply that. And when the concept of fear of failure came out, I was very much like, this resonates with me a lot, especially because entrepreneurs as individuals are so different from who I am. I really need a stable job to secure food on the plate of my family. And so the curiosity of understanding what drives the minds of these individuals is so fascinating that I decided then to turn into, how do they really cope with their fears? What are these fears about? Are they there or not there? Because when I started, the field was a little bit different than it is today in terms of approach to fears and anxieties and different negative emotions of entrepreneurs. So yeah, I the fear fell has been always with me, but I always had the infrastructure and that gave me the freedom to really sink in and feel it and understand it without the anxiety of overcoming it immediately, because this is what people in some circumstances have to do when they don't have the right support, to psychological support and social support, to overcome it.
So, even though you stumbled on the topic by serendipity, it personally resonated with you. It was almost like, oh, this was bound to happen,
Yeah.
sort of thing. Okay.
Yeah, and I think this is important, because if you don't love what you do, it's a hard job. It's really hard to cope with it. And then, you can really say, oh, there's this amazing hot topic that if I study this, it's gonna I'm gonna really publish immediately because this is what everybody's talking about. But if you don't like it, I mean, what's the point? It's still your life, it's still your everyday process, and you don't want to be miserable and working on something that you don't like and you don't find useful, you don't find meaningful. And these things, I was lucky to find these things in a topic that somehow was given to me.
You know, it's interesting you say that because that's the same message Shakar gave yesterday, Shakar Zada. He said, love what you do. And in this profession, if you don't love what you do, it's going to be difficult to be successful over time. So,
Yeah.
yeah. Now, would it, our understanding is that you were among the forefront of people for, at the forefront of sort of bringing the concept of fear of failure to entrepreneurship and popularizing it. Is that a correct understanding of your work in this area? And if yes, what was it like to sort of start your career with something that was new to entrepreneurship?
So yes, you're correct. When the top, so the reason why my supervisor at that time thought that that was interesting was because everybody was talking about fear of failure as a barrier to entrepreneurship. So at the beginning was all about, okay, let's see how entrepreneurs can overcome this barrier. And so start a business is always finding a way of reducing it for the general population so that they could start a business. Because the main belief in the field was that as an entrepreneur, if you have fear of failure, you don't start a business. So if you start a business, then you don't have fear of failure. So we were not studying fear of failure of existing entrepreneurs, assuming that they don't have it. And at that time, when my supervisor was pitching this idea, I was like, but fear is a human emotion. How can we exclude, even if these are extraordinary individuals that create something out of nothing, how can we be sure that they don't experience fear? I mean, put yourself in their shoes. What if you are losing from one overnight one of your major clients that can jeopardize your entire business? Do you think you're not going to experience fear constantly in that moment? So for me, it was just not okay. These predominant assumptions that if you are fearful, you're never going to be an entrepreneur. If you are an entrepreneur, then you don't have fear. It wasn't really resonating. So I started to study both the status of the literature of the field, which was predominantly shaped by the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor data, where there is one item that says, does fear of failure prevent you from starting a business? And in itself, the item I realized was not even correct, because you are already connecting fear of failure to a behavior. Because what if I say no? Does it mean I don't have fear? Or it only means that I might have fear, but it doesn't prevent me. So you're not studying really the experience of fear that sometimes can push us to fight and other times to fly away, right? So we were not noticing that simply because we were measuring fear failure the wrong way, or in one way but not in a comprehensive way. So I started to look at the existing literature, look at the psychology literature, especially the studies, that part of psychology where the construct was mostly studied, education and sports, performative context. And I realized that there was so much to do around it, because in entrepreneurship, to me, that might actually be very situational. It doesn't have to be only a personality trait. It can be really triggered by the million setbacks and obstacles that entrepreneurs face every day. And so this is how I started to investigate, and then I started to say a different narrative. And it wasn't very easy, because at the beginning, when you do this as a PhD student, and if you're looking for a job and you go for your job talk and they say, okay, this is great, but if you're wrong, you don't have anything. And I had that one time, and I'm like, all right. So I had somebody who was actually pushing back on, for that person, it was only a personality matter. So this idea of the situations and the temporality of the construct was, it was not resonating with a person. But I kept saying, I understand that, but I really believe in what I'm doing. I'm sure that my data is good, and I want to keep going, and I'm okay if you don't believe this. So there are some gatekeepers of some beliefs and assumptions. But at the same time, if you believe in your data, if you do a great job as a scientist, as a social scientist, I think that you will always find a way, of somebody open enough to hear your great story. And I was lucky enough, or I don't know what happened, but the work was, all the dissertation or whatever I wrote in the PhD, everything was published. And 2 out of 3, I think one was published before the end of the PhD, and then another one was under review before the end of the PhD, or even probably yeah, before the end of the PhD. And the last one was easy. I don't want to say easy to publish, but it was an immediate, yes, we need this, and a lot of work, of course. But I found my right crowd. I found the people that actually believe in the work.
So the construct of the idea of fear of failure that you found motivated you enough that you made it your dissertation topic.
Mhm.
You stuck with it for several years after, And your dissertation also won the NFIB award from the Entrepreneurship Division, which I'm assuming sort of encouraged you to work more in this direction. Is that correct?
Yeah, but yeah, it was not just that. The first paper, the literature review, was the top 5 cited papers that year in the journal, and the reconceptualization, the qualitative work to understand the concept, the conceptual boundaries of what entrepreneurial fear of failure is, won the award in the JBV journal for that year of publication. So I think I'm saying this simply to highlight how then, after it was out, it really resonated a lot
Right.
with the crowd. Even with those people who were skeptical and were like, I don't really know. At the end, and even if you look at the sites now, the work is highly cited because it's interesting, it's real. People wanna, and I'm so happy about it because I don't want to be the only one working on this. I open the gates so a lot of people can, and we need more of this. Yeah.
Right. So at this stage, when you've been doing this for more than 10 years, more than a decade has passed with you being involved in fear of failure in entrepreneurship, how do you look back at sort of where this research has come and where it can go in the future?
Okay, so I think we have so many more opportunities with the work that we can do on fear of failure, and of course, I get lots of reviews on the topic, of course, right? And the main problem that I see is that scholars keep reiterating the same things that we already know. We already know that it could go both ways, so that can make you fly away or fight, approach or avoid. We know that there is a dichotomy. We now need to know how to shape that dichotomy, what drives one decisions over the other, because it's also within the individual. It's not that everybody, some people with fear, they will always approach things and others will always avoid. Even within the same individuals, there is this battle that of course is very situational. So I think we have to go longitudinal. First of all, one time measurement doesn't tell us much about what fear does. And think about this. Think about yourself. When you are super anxious and you have fears within yourself because of something that you're doing that you cannot accomplish, or some situational things, of course, the intense feeling can come and go, be very intense in different moment of the day, but sometimes it's always with you. It's there because you haven't solved the situation. And for entrepreneurs, this can become very chronic. It's a chronic thing, or they find ways of coping with it. So there are so many elements that we can now study in understanding longitudinally what really happens around the entrepreneur in the moment of fear. I'm lately and I have a study that is under review looking at this, and it's two longitudinal studies, lots of measurements, different waves to capture how the fear one moment keep influencing the fear of the next one, and what you can do with your mind to control it. But we can do even more. We haven't looked at how this works in teams, for example. Is there empathy that can actually help each other, or there is a contagion instead? So we don't know this, and I think the problem is probably the difficulty in studying it, because talking about fears is not easy at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we tend to frown upon sort of fear. So I hear you said you see potential in two things: longitudinal research in this area and uh, team
Teams,
idea of fear
team
of failure.
dynamic, yes.
Is there anything else that you see potential? Are there other
Um,
potential avenues?
So I have a study where we looking, because my research only can go darker. So we from fear now I'm looking at the general concept of vulnerability, which is more than uncertainty, is this idea of really going deep into perceiving adequacy of the self and actually being open about it. So, and I tried to, this was phenomenon based, so I was not expecting this, but I realized, for example, that some entrepreneurs on social media were very open about their vulnerabilities without resolution. I'm not talking about people who said, I was very scared and things were not working, and then all of a sudden I was great and I made them work. No, I'm looking at people who are very open about, I don't know why I'm here. I really don't know. I don't know how to, cope with the tax that I have to pay. Really being open about this without resolution. And the social media context gave me an outlet to actually move from this idea that becomes a private lived experience just within yourself into narrating it. And so even that is interesting because, okay, now are we moving from internal psychological processes to narrative theory, narrative storytelling, and so engaging others and what that engagement is doing. So that is also another way of expanding and looking at what entrepreneur. In this case, I was really guided by them. I saw the phenomenon and I got interested. So maybe it's the entrepreneurs that are informing us on how they are coping or finding ways of legitimizing something that has been so difficult to talk about.
Well, which is something interesting you bring up, that even though the idea came from sort of the psychology literature, but you see a lot of practical resonance of this idea. And so that's the interface between theory and practice that we keep talking about, right?
Yeah.
In this profession. At least that's what I'm hearing you say.
Yeah, I was very surprised, and that was the beauty of that, because it made the phenomenon very interesting. It's now under review, so hopefully none of the reviewers is here.
Wonderful. So let me remind our audience that after my next question, we'll open up the floor for questions from the audience. I'll ask one more question, and that should give folks some time to think about what you want to ask. So, as you said, you review a lot of papers, right? As anyone who's well published does. What do you look for in a paper? How do you decide if a paper has good potential or not? This question is important because many of our participants might be thinking of submitting their own research to good journals, and the reviewers' comments sometimes don't give us much guidance when we read them.
Okay, so usually I look at, okay, so the quality of the data, but I'm also aware sometimes of the limitation of social science, in terms of, not really limitation, but I'm mostly a qualitative researcher. I do also do some quantitative work, but there's no perfect design, right? Every design has its own limitation, but at least the data has to be good enough to support the story that you want to tell. So make sure that whatever method you apply, you're very clean about it. You're following the updated standards. And so that's one point. And another one, I don't know, maybe I'm old style because now there's a different conversation, but I really look at the theoretical contributions, wondering, are the authors good in articulating how, because of this study, now we can look at things differently, or we can complement things in a certain way. If it's a qualitative work, I'm mostly focusing on how this work is challenging, changing, or expanding substantially or significantly existing literature. If it's a quantitative work and you're testing hypotheses, pretty much the same, but the idea is about, you do most of this work in building and explaining your theoretical model and then testing it. So already your theoretical model with the hypothesis that you're building, you're already trying to question and challenge some of the assumptions that we take for granted. So I look at that, and I'm also interested in in those who are able to do things differently. I'm not necessarily looking at how the standard is. The standard is important for legitimacy, but at the same time, if you want to do something peculiar that is slightly different, my recommendation is always to provide a very clear understanding and guide the reader in what you're doing. Don't be fast, don't be quick in doing that, because especially if you're doing something slightly off the mainstream. So I'm open to look at different things. But the idea of being really good at articulating how this study is helping, is adding a good piece of knowledge to what we already have, without just sometimes I push back on papers because in the discussions they are regurgitating their findings. That's one thing you don't want to do. So look at the findings, and now it's time to say, because of this, this is what is going to happen next, moving in the creation of knowledge. So that's the way, in simple words, that are what I really write to back to the authors. Now what happens?
Yeah, and this idea of repeating the findings in the discussion, I think a lot of people who are starting their career, that's a common thing to happen, right? And
Yes.
then you have to learn about this unique way that management papers are written, which is a big, long backend that does not repeat the findings. But yeah. Um, Before we move to the audience question, I do have a follow-up question. You mentioned quantitative papers, you look for this, qualitative papers, you look for this. As coming from, because you're trained from the psychological tradition, I assume the training was heavily quantitative. When do you suggest people in their academic journey start sort of exploring both quantitative and qualitative, or are most people better off sort of staying in one lane? What's your view on that?
Okay, so I can tell you about my journey, and I don't know whether it might be a suggestion for what can really happen. So, yes, I started with a supervisor who was extremely quantitative, never done any qualitative work in the past, very positivist in the approach. Let's use this word. Like, if something exists, it's because you can measure it. If you cannot measure it, it doesn't really exist. That sort of thing. And then we come across fear of failure. And we realized in entrepreneurship, and realized, the two of us, that there was no way. We're talking about something that nobody has really ever defined. How do we do that? We have to talk to people. We have to understand the phenomenon, how people lived it. So I was a quick switch in my PhD journey because of the topic I encountered. So I started with like attending structural equation modeling summer schools and getting lost and hating it. And I was like, where is the individual in all of this? Because that's me. I mean, and then thankfully, the topic imposed on me the fact that I had to explore before explaining. And so I'm a believer in the cycle. I'm not one or the other. I'm like, if we don't know, we need to engage with people, especially, if you're looking at phenomena that involve individuals and their experience, let's talk to them. And then I completed the cycle. I from their accounts, I defined it, I developed a measure, and now I'm actually using the measure in other studies and continuing to understand the phenomenon and experiences of individuals and their interpretations of what they do. So for me, it was more about, it was dictated by what I was doing. For others, well, there's no good or bad time, there is only your interest. Some researchers never develop both interests. Some of us are mainly in one method choice because they like it. Others like to experiment both. But I would say that if you have time, please study whatever a different method that you don't know, especially if in the PhD and you don't have many engagements, then you have time. You really have time. But if you're not interested, that's okay. That's totally okay. But being able to read research in both whatever method, that's also important, I think. So a little bit of knowledge is okay.
Wonderful. Thank you, Gabriella. You know what you said about PhD student life? Many PhD students say that they don't have time at that stage. They'll have more time when they become faculty. And of
Sure.
course, yes. And so Carolina has a question, and Carolina, do you mind asking your question on camera?
No, not at all. Hello, Dr. Cacciotti. I hope that you can hear me properly.
Yes.
Nice to meet you. I'm an instructor of international business and management. I've been teaching entrepreneurship for a long time, and I love to involve my students with the idea of failure, and they know why startups failed. I didn't, before reading the papers for today, I was not that mindful of thinking of the fear of failure. So it was something new to me. So I wonder if you have any perceptions of idea of, of some research also on the fear of failure from the venture capitalist perspective, from the investor. What my feeling is, or what I have observed, is that we treat the investor as an external stakeholder, but once there is interest and there is investment, there is this close relationship with this other human being or another set of investors. So I wonder if you know any, or is there some research about the fear of failure that they also have and bring to the venture?
No, I don't. I'm not really familiar with that. What I started to do a few months ago, instead of VC, I was looking at angel investors and how and the feeling of regret in investing in some people. It's not necessarily the same, but there is a little bit of psychological processes there. So we wanted to know whether when they make a decision of investing in some entrepreneurs versus others, what happens if the entrepreneur fail and whether or not they experience any form of regret. And in those interviews, they walked us through the entire decision-making process. And what we realized, and again, this is angel, it's a different context, but it's still an investor perspective, was that usually every investment decision is a part of a strategy. And they already know in the job that they do that they have a portfolio. Some can do well and some can not go well. So the portfolio is usually built in considering the risk that they're facing with the failures that necessarily will happen for some entrepreneurs and not others. For VC, I really don't know, but surely it might be an interesting aspect of understanding exactly, what it is that they are fearing. They're just fearing the failure, and what are the consequences of the failure of that entrepreneur is more on their reputation, or maybe they also have a strategy or portfolio that might actually consider that element of risk. And so, I mean, I don't know, I would certainly be interested in doing. I had at one time another conversation that's slightly different, but it changes the perspective. I think one researcher was interested in looking at how investors can evaluate the fear of entrepreneurs and to what extent that perceived fear can actually be seen as an asset as opposed to a negative outcomes or a negative feature of the entrepreneur. Why this? Because again, fear can have many positive implications, but negative and positive. So what is the perception of an investor when they see the fear of an entrepreneur, how they perceive that, and what can we do to help venture capitalists or transform that fear in an asset or something that is perceived as such. Sorry, I don't know anything about it, but it's certainly interesting.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolina. Thank you.
And that does open the door for sort of next stream of research, right? If somebody wanted to study fear of failure or related dynamics among investors, I think that's what I got from what Gabriella said. Is that correct interpretation, Gabriella?
Oh yeah, it will be. I mean, I'm not aware of any research, but I haven't looked up, so I don't know whether anything is there already. But it's certainly interesting to do. Yeah.
Wonderful, thank you. Riz Pezada, you are next.
Yeah, hi, thank you. Thanks, Prof. Gabriella. Very quick one. I mean, from fear of failure or vulnerability point of view, I mean, I was recently aiming to do some research on women in entrepreneurship in the Gulf countries, and especially from in terms of AI. So how I mean, how it could be an enabler or perhaps a huge barrier in that sense. And given the cultural context and stuff, so this, if I move ahead, it might most likely take me from quant to qual. So that would be an interesting journey, I would hope. And I was very pleased to see that, at at any given point of time, one should be able to explore that. So just any quick thought on what's happening on AI and vulnerability, particularly from gender entrepreneurship point of view.
Yeah, so the vulnerability study that I was talking about is mostly the women entrepreneurs who are posting it as opposed to men. We haven't seen any in the observation period. We only saw women entrepreneurs disclosing their vulnerability. So that was really interesting, and another idea for why are not men doing it to the same extent. And so another idea regarding AI. I'm about to start another study looking at how, especially the newest generation, use AI to discuss their fears as they start a business, whether or not they use it mostly as an outlet, like a therapy type of thing. And so that is the use of AI I am interested in right now, and in terms of discussing fears and vulnerabilities, and as opposed to going to people, turning to AI to brief about it. I have this fear. What does it mean? What's going to happen? And then see the consequences of that, because usually fear is also very good in terms of creating tension, especially in a team, for example, that you will have to resolve with your mates, with your teammates. And in the resolution, then you move on as a team and you make decisions. What if you turn to AI to fix that fears and anxieties, and you stop there? And maybe it's good because you keep functioning, but maybe it's not good in terms of consequences for team dynamics and the evolution of your business, and we don't know. But this is something that, especially young generation that are constantly with their phone, and they already use the chat box, the chat and the therapy options that artificial intelligence gives you for other things, even like, how do I like that girl, how I'm gonna talk to her, please tell me, this type of things. And so I'm imagining that they will transfer that approach also with other anxieties that they have, especially if then decide to become entrepreneurs. So that's one idea. In terms of, you mean using AI for the business development side of things, or for what?
Yeah, I mean, I think I did some guest speaking on women in AI in Qatar, local chapter. So it went very well, actually. And my concept was, AI as an enabler in startup journey, so for females entrepreneur particularly, but not many females come from technical background, so AI could be just sort of a taboo. I mean, I'm not sure, like sort of a self-built constraint. So I was thinking on those lines, like how that impact their trigger point into actioning upon ideation, or idea perhaps.
Yeah, I guess you might want to compare what were the concerns before AI, um, because if they're yeah, what AI does, as you said, it provides, for some, it provides some technical skills and allows you to be quicker on the building side of things, not on the problem solving necessarily. That stays the same pretty much. But before AI, so then, and now you say AI can be an enabler for some, but not for all of them. Is this actually, even that some is higher than before, or what is going to happen? So yes, I think a conversation and understanding what is stopping them, compared to a moment where AI was not so predominant, might actually be a good idea. Yeah.
Thank you, Raj.
Thank
Thank you.
Wonderful. And Riz, what I hear Gabriella say is that this seems like a potentially fertile area of research and not much examined in this stream of work.
Yeah. Thanks, Vishal. Thank you for the support always. Thank you.
Wonderful. Ebru, do you want to go next?
Thank you, dear Professor Gupta. Hello, Professor. Actually, fear of failure is a very nice area, and I'm very new to the topic. So I have two questions, with your permission. The first one is, if the fear of failure can be studied together with individual ambidexterity in entrepreneurial settings.
I guess you
Because
can. Yeah.
my assumption would be that fear of failure would lead to more of exploitation. This is the starting point I have in mind, especially in uncertain environments. So I think this can be a good area to study. And my second question is fear of failure appropriate for experimental designs? If so, how can it be done? Thank you so much.
Yeah, so thank you for this is a great question. So to your first question, of course, then you will have to. So it depends on if you are studying ambidexterity in a certain moment of venture development and really look. You can look at this as people, they are exploring their idea at the beginning of their entrepreneurial process and they move on, or you are looking at how they react to a certain environmental or to a certain traumatic experience that they might actually leave with their venture. So is fear of failure leading them to do one thing versus the other? What's going to happen? You can certainly do that. You just have to come up with a design that really, I think, will focus on environmental circumstances that can call to the need of exploitation. Regarding the experimental designs, of course you can. Yes, there are so many experimental designs where actually, and you can do, it depends on what you're doing. The design is not a problem, and the problem is always coming up with an interesting research question that then requires an experiment to be addressed. So I wouldn't fixate on the method. To me is always most interesting to say, what do I really want to study? And if in a fear of failure, you have the scale, of course, so you can measure that. And in an experiment, if you want to trigger fear of failure, then you have to create a scenario that in which you can be sure that fear of failure is triggered, and you can assess that, of course. So certainly you can do that, and I've seen papers doing that too.
Thank you, dear Professor.
Thank you.
So, Gabriella, would it be correct to infer that your own approach to research reflects what you just said, which is question first, then the method that might be appropriate to answer that question?
Yeah, totally correct. And that's why you want to have a lot of friends in this field, because sometimes the way you want to answer that question doesn't fall within your expertise. And if you want to be quick, then you want to knock on the door of a friend who's really good at something you're not good at. And that's sometimes the best secret of very successful team and of co-authors. Complementarity, and of course you want to like the people you work with. Doesn't happen all the time, but as you move on, please work with people you like, because right, Ludwig, work with people you like. And so yeah, I think that's a strategy.
Wonderful. So I guess you called on Ludwig, so let Ludwig ask the next question. I'm assuming you know him. So
yes, he's in our mentorship program. Come on, Vishal, you know him too.
Hi, Gabby. Thanks so much for what you presented. It was really interesting. If we think about the boundary conditions of fear of failure, in other words, what determines whether it becomes paralyzing or generative, what would you suggest out of your experience we should actually follow? So should the unit of analysis be the entrepreneur, the venture over time, the fear triggering episode itself? Because I'm kind of just wondering whether the fear triggering episode, almost as you relate to Ebru, might be the clearest unit, because we can then trace, the event, the appraisal, the coping response, and the action that follows. But out of your experience, what do you think might be the most useful unit of analysis?
Okay, so that's a very good question. And this allows me to actually go deeper into the nature of the phenomenon, but also of the measure that we developed. When we decided to, and I say we because of course that was my dissertation, but I was working with my supervisors and a couple of other people. When we were looking at the phenomenon, we realized that if you want to look at fear of failure as a temporary emotional experience triggered by what happens around you, then of course you wanna have an eye on the environment. But how do you actually, what it becomes interesting at the end of the day is how that how the trigger and really is how the environmental event is really a trigger for the individual. So for example,
Gabriella, I think we lost you. Okay, it seems Gabriella froze. Let me reach out to her and see.
hello.
Hey. Okay, Gabriella is back in with us. Sorry about the interruption. Gabriella, are you back?
I am back. Can you see me? Sorry, but
Yes.
my computer just crashed, so I have no idea what happened. Anyway, so I was saying that, so one thing is to look at the environment, and this is the same thing with a phenomenon with entrepreneurship in adversity context. Okay, we've been studying entrepreneurship, understanding resilience, for example, assuming that if people face an adversity, they feel stressed, and so let's study what happens. But one thing is to look at the adversity as an objective event, and one thing is to really understand whether the individual perceives it as adversity itself. And the same thing is with fear. If you just focus on the environmental trigger without understanding whether that has really triggered something in the individual, I mean, what are we doing? So that was the reasoning behind leveraging the appraisal theory of emotion to say, yes, things might happen, but we want to be interested in how individuals perceive it. Is that thing really creating a feeling of fear in the individual? So this means that you might actually study fear of failure in certain circumstances, but you don't want to just look at the circumstance and inferring that, people are fearful because of that. You always want to go down to the measure and actually assess whether fear is that. And the measure we have allows you to do that. And it's measuring different aspects of fear. That event, whatever it is, it could be, again, the loss of a super client or a financial shock that might disrupt your entire business. What type of fear is that triggering? Fear of not having money at the end of the month, fear of anything else. So that's what we've been doing with that.
And I guess that's the main contribution of your dissertation, right? This interactionist view between the person and the situation.
Yes, correct.
Wonderful. Mike, Gabriella, can we take 2 more audience questions before
Sure,
we?
yeah, absolutely.
Mike, do you want to go next?
Yeah, thank you, Visha, and thank you, Professor Gabriella, for your presentation. I think part of my question has been asked by my colleague who just spoke before your computer froze. But the next aspect is looking at what is the role of faith or religious belief within the fear of failure literature, because I'm much interested in going in this direction. So could you give me some advice here? Yeah.
Mike, a wonderful question. Yes. So I think in my research, not so much of that aspect came up. And I could be due to the nature of the sample. Most of the entrepreneurs were based in the UK and in North America, Canada specifically. But I've been living in Texas for 5 years now, and I can tell you how much the faith language is in everything they talk about. So I'm assuming that the impact of religion into your life varies depending on how really religion is part of your life, depending on where you come from. And I don't exclude the many entrepreneurs coming from certain areas, or no, depends, have that use faith eventually as a way of coping with that fear, moving on with their life. This happened to me. It's something that God, the Lord, wants me to put through. So that conversation might become a part of a coping mechanism that you have to actually push through and be okay with what's going on around you. But I have some research with a fantastic friend of mine. This is his PhD. This dissertation now is an assistant professor, but we looked at refugee entrepreneurs from especially Syria to Egypt, Somalia to Egypt. And in their conversation, in some of them, God was predominant in the narrative. I mean, they went through adversity, now they're starting a business, and that was part of their making sense of what was going on with their life. And I think it was last year or 2 years ago at the Academy of Management, I was part of a very nice and well put together workshop on adversity, extreme adversity. And in that moment, I think we had a conversation about the role of hope, love, and faith that we don't talk too much about in our field. So that, of course, fear gets into the group here, because fear and hope are certainly related, love and faith, the hope and faith. So totally, if this is a topic, Mike, you are interested in, pursue it, because it's not only interesting, but it's also very hot at the moment.
Wonderful. Khalik, you had a question? And Khalik is someone who's already doing research on fear of failure.
Lovely.
So Khalik, do you want to ask your question on camera?
Yes, Professor. Thank you very much for providing me the opportunity. Basically, I have a question regarding failure, because in my PhD dissertation, I have studied some of the things that are related to the failure. But my question remains persistent, that what comes next after failure? Maybe the failure is like on two stages: before the entrepreneurial event occurs and after the entrepreneurial event occurs. Firstly, we have a fear of, like, we will be able to do that or not. After that, when it happens, that when entrepreneurial event occurs, might be it is a venture, might be it is like a startup or something. Then it comes to word success, like might be it took 3 years, 5 years, 7 years to succeed. So what comes between there? And the second question is, what after the failure? Like, one thing is fear of failure. The second one is actually the failure. Might be that venture got failed. So what next? Do the person needs to quit that business, or like, the question is in my mind, and I'm still trying to understand and trying to study from literature and from the professors like you people. I want to understand the phenomena and how I can like further this research.
Yeah. Great question. Thank you so much. So regarding the first, if I have understood correctly, you are interested in understanding, okay, at the beginning, we have this fear of starting the business in the first few years, then later on, what kind of fears and what really happens to the fear, right? Is that the first question?
Yes, Professor. Yes,
Okay,
very right.
so what I was mostly focusing on early days of your startup process. However, already in those studies, we realized that fears can change, and as you move on with your venture and you start to build the venture, fears is more about not just you, but how your organization is able to do things. So it's more about the organization ability to keep up with the environment, to grow. And of course, some of the fears are the financial, the ability to find the venture, they stay in place, especially if you as a business throughout the years have decided to scale and to grow. So that's why there is a need of longitudinal studies, studies over time. If we are really interested in how this fear changes, well, we have to study that, because at the moment I have never done it myself. I haven't seen any study looking at fear of the same entrepreneurs or entrepreneurial team has changed as your business progresses and goes from 1, 3, 5, or 10 years. And of course, fears also change with the maturity and the experience of the entrepreneur. For some entrepreneurs, the early days fear of not being able to do things might actually not be there anymore, as you've been working on the venture for many years, or have started many years. Well, now I know how to hire people. Now I know how to take care of this. So some of those fears might actually decrease because you gain in experience. But some others that are less internal and more external, you might not have control over. Some entrepreneurs will live constantly with the fear of not being able to feed their family at the end of the month. And this, we don't know how that evolves. So first of all, another opportunity to study. The second question, what happens next? Well, what happens next, meaning after failure, pretty much depends on what do you want to see? What do you want to study? In the post-failure literature, there are different streams of interest. We are interested in understanding how people react to the failure experience, looking at two things, how they cope with grief and how they learn from failure. To do the next step, eventually we want to study how they learn from failure so that they can start again and be successful. And this feeds into the other stream of research, which is all about, are those companies or entrepreneurs that have already failed start again businesses that eventually become successful? So what do you want to study? You want to study the journey of the individual, or you want to study the performance of the next created venture? Eventually you can combine the two, and I have a study right now where we are looking at the shame of the failed entrepreneur, and how the shame drives a new starting of a venture, and how the new venture is able to perform because of the shame. And we are challenging, and see here what I'm doing, I'm already challenging with my assumptions the belief that shame has to be cured in the failed entrepreneur to start again. I'm already from the beginning in this quantitative study saying, no, actually, for some people, shame becomes a driver. Keep it there. And then, and then there are implications. We see that shameful entrepreneur, they start ventures, they perform better. But then we discuss also the implications of this for the next study and say, now that we know that shame can be a driver, can we actually understand whether it can even lead people to cheat? So this is one way of looking at it. But what are you interested in the post failure? What interests
Thank
you?
you, Professor, for detailed answers. Basically, there are two streams that I'm working with. One is like I have already put it in the question that in Pakistan, like Pakistan and India, we have a like gray economy, and we call it the gray entrepreneurship, when where most of the entrepreneurial ventures did not get registered with the government agencies and the authorities. They
Mm-hmm.
do like their business at their own, and sometimes they succeeded and sometimes they got failure. The
Mm.
second perspective is about social entrepreneurship. When it comes, and other phenomena that I'm studying nowadays, it is coming from compassion, that how compassion can help people after failure, like as you have rightly identified, that how compassion can at least help them in the face of shame, or might be that relevant phenomena.
Yeah, very interesting, wonderful topics. Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you. And I know, Gabriella, we asked you for 60 minutes of your time, but is it okay if I ask you two more questions to
Sure.
wind this up?
Yeah.
Perfect. So my next question to you is, you touched on this idea of doing research in teams. Now, given where you are in your career and given the success you've had so far, I'm assuming you get many invitations by email from people you don't even know to form research teams with you. So, how do you approach a project? How do you form a research team? Do you just say yes to any invitation that comes your way? Are you proactive about forming a research team? Tell us about a specific idea, and then how did the research team come together? How did you decide where to submit the paper? Walk us through that, please.
Okay, so regarding the requests that I get, yes, oftentimes you get a request, but I would love to help everybody, but at the same time, the time is very limited. And at the same time, again, if there has to be some enthusiasm there. So there has to be something that I enjoy doing because I see that this is really important for the world to know. And the suggestion I give that was given to me, and I give it to everybody, if you want to invite somebody you don't really know to become part of your research team, try to write the best paper you can write, and then approach whoever you want to. It doesn't have to be a famous professor or whatever. Anybody like me, anybody that can actually, you want the help with, the help of. Don't do a sloppy job of just writing an email and say, I'm doing this, can you help me? I mean, what do you want to help on? I don't know where it started. So depends on what you're asking me. If you want to involve me into an early research project, and so you want me to be involved in the early stages, do the same thing. Write a very detailed email with a plan that you have and be very transparent about it. Usually, I evaluate everything on a case by case. I don't have a specific approach, but I also have limited time, and I'm assuming that everybody's like this. So if it's a cold call on like, can you join me? Please try to do the best job you can do and then approach the person. Personally, if it's me that I have to start a research project and I have to put together a team. Some projects actually come out from conversation. So you already partner up with a colleague and you are discussing, and it becomes a clear partner because you are co-creating the idea together. But sometimes, as I said, I think about stuff and then I realize I would love to study this way. And I do have my favorite people I really enjoyed working together, so I tend to gravitate towards the same people. But I'm also open in calling colleagues or people in my network that I know are actually very good at something I'm not very good at. And I would do this exactly the same thing that I did to you. Even if they are my friends, I would never just text them and say, I have this idea, do you want to come on board? I would put together as much information I can and be clear about my idea and be clear about the ask, which doesn't mean deciding necessarily the order of others from day one. Some people love it, and there's no problem with that. But me personally, and if it's me creating the idea, of course, I want to give perception that I'm a leading author. But I'm always very open and rediscussing that and be very honest. If you realize that another coder is actually putting more effort and driving the project, let them, go ahead of you and be open about it. I'm also mindful that when I work with assistant professors who need tenure, I have no problem to say I'm okay in doing a little bit of extra work, but you go as a first author because that's more helpful to you than it is to me. And I think this is a feature of the field that we have, how beautiful and how friendly and how sympathetic and empathetic we are with each other. And I never encounter any problem with anybody in my quarters team that don't have that understanding, right? So yeah, that's what I had to say.
Wonderful. So now moving to the last question for today. You are chairing the mentorship division, the mentorship committee for the entrepreneurship division, which means you meet a lot of PhD students sort of in your professional life, and you meet a lot of young academics or junior scholars in your career so far. What's one advice you would give to people who are sort of trying to make their name in entrepreneurship research, trying to get published in good journals? What would be your advice to them?
Okay, so the publication game is becoming tougher and tougher. But the thing is, understanding whether the name, so becoming somebody all in our field, or at least establishing your name in our field, only has to go through publication, right? We have that assumption, and I'm like, it's not necessarily the case. I know so many wonderful people, and I know that they are relevant for the field, not just because of the things they have published. So first, develop that understanding, and it's not just about publishing papers, it's about what you can do for the field. So if the publication game is giving you hard times, find other ways to actually spread your research, organize workshop, write a blog if you want to get it out in a certain way, but also find ways to be involved in the division, because that's another way of creating the network, creating impact. Look at the community around you. What is happening where I am that I can actually plug into communities and help entrepreneurs on the ground to do something and talk about it. Nowadays, it's all about becoming visible. Social media allows you to do this greatly. I'm not very good at that. I just hate it, but that's me. But so you adapt to the environment. I know we all know that publishing is important. It's one aspect of our job, and you are eager to do that to secure your work. But the voice, we've been talking about what's your voice and what's your identity. Your identity doesn't go only through papers that you publish. It goes through what you can really do for the field. Become a review that really does a great job, and you're going to be recognized for that. And that's a way of shaping the field. So the advice I would give to people is certainly not just think that publication is the only way to become part of the field. So look for other avenues that might actually suit your personality and give even more meaning to what you do. Still, publishing your research is important, so try that at the same time.
But you've opened sort of a very unconventional door here, right? That think about contributing to the field in other ways than just publishing. And you talked about social media, you talked about doing things in the community, and so on and so forth, all of which takes time as well, right? So
Yeah.
how do you suggest someone sort of at an early stage in their career make these trade-offs?
Well, so the trade-off becomes a trade-off. So the conversation here is, okay, publishing is important, but if you're really having hard times and that's making you become even more stressful, then finding alternatives is not a trade-off anymore, right? So it's more seen this as a strategy, because of course you'll be spending time in your dissertation for the purpose of getting it out. But if that becomes a struggle, then find strategy to adapt, thinking that again, you being an author is not the only way to contribute to the field. I'll tell you this funny thing. I was on social media a month ago, I guess, and I saw Professor Foss publishing a paper that, the title was, the essence was this Friday morning seminars that institutions usually organize, where you invite somebody to speak, and then you as a chair, maybe you force everybody to attend. How is this seminar series disrupting the productivity of scholars in publishing their paper? And this, and then under there was a comment from Per Davidson saying, but do we really need more papers? And so that made me really laugh, because yeah, we are in this narrative of publishing, where the field needs fantastic teachers. We need fantastic contributor. The Academy of Management does so much for us. We here doing this, and guess what? We're doing this instead of writing a paper, but perhaps I'm having more impact today than in the last couple of years. That's what I mean. Yeah.
Amen to that. Thank you, Gabriella, for a wonderful session today. We really appreciate that you took the time to come visit with us, and hopefully you'll meet some of these people. You'll cross paths with them at AOM or other places.
Please, if you see me at AOM, stop me. I only see a few faces here.